Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tabor Sawatsky. I'm with GOPHER, and I'd like to welcome all of you to today's GOPHER Solutions webinar. For those of you who are new to our webinar series, this is a monthly webinar focusing on a variety of physical education subjects and topics. Past webinar topics have included PE teachers presenting on specific activities like assessment, fitness, classroom management, and PE advocacy. Some of our past presenters have included Dr. Robert Pangrazi, Dr. John Medina, and Jean Blades. Our presenters have done a great job of bringing useful topics and information to the field of physical education. Our webinars will almost always occur the third week of the month, and all attendees of today's webinar will receive a certificate of participation for 1 hour of educational credit. Also today, all attendees will be entered to win the InReach Screamin' Yellow coated foam ball set, a $100 value. Today's webinar is titled Inclusion in PE, a Choice Not a Mandate with Maria Court. And before I introduce Maria, I wanted to mention that you will have the chance to ask questions at any time during the presentations. If you look on the right-hand side of our screen, there is an area there for question and answers where you can type in any questions you might have throughout the presentation. Your questions are only visible to me, the moderator, so feel free to ask any questions you might have during the presentation. Like I mentioned, you can type those on the right-hand side of the screen in the questions area. We'll accumulate the questions throughout the presentation and have a chance to address your questions with Maria at the end of the presentation. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our presenter, Maria Court. Maria attended Arizona State University, where she received a physical education bachelor's degree. She received her master's degree from the University of Phoenix in Education Administration. Maria has been teaching at Mesa High School since 1994 and at Arizona State University Polytechnic campus since 2005 in the Physical Education Department. While teaching at Mesa High, Maria has developed and created a cutting-edge fitness program and the Mesa High Elite Fitness Club, which serves as a model for schools around the country. In addition to her teaching, she has coached varsity volleyball, track, cheerleading, and is one of the strength and conditioning coaches at her high school. Maria has made numerous state and national presentations. She speaks on a number of topics including innovative fitness routines, motivation and positive attitude, skill instruction, and management and discipline. Maria was named the 2004 Arizona High School Physical Education Teacher of the Year, and in 2005 she received the SHAPE Southwest District High School Teacher of the Year Award. At this time, I will turn it over to our presenter, Maria. Maria, it's all yours.
All right. Well, thank you, Tabor, and hello, everyone. Thanks for taking the time away from your much-deserved summer to tune into this. I appreciate it. I know how valuable our summers are. Let me just start by telling you a little bit about where I teach and what I teach before we get into this webinar and this topic. I've been at Mesa, as Tabor said, I've been at Mesa High School in Mesa, Arizona for the past 22 years. It's one of the largest high schools in Arizona, and it's a Title I school. About 75% of the students are on free and reduced lunch. I teach all of the fitness classes there. I have an advanced fitness class and the regular fitness classes throughout the day. There's about 10 PE teachers on our campus and one adaptive PE teacher who is a traveler, and we'll get into that later as we talk about inclusion. So that's pretty much the background. I don't have a lot of experience in inclusion, and that's what we're going to talk about, and I thought that's why this was so important, because I was faced with having special needs in my classes out of nowhere, and I ended up having just a wonderful experience, and that's why I chose this topic, and I believe it's a very important one for all of us to kind of take a look at and maybe wrap our heads around it and change our mindset about what it looks like and what it can mean and how it can impact you and your students, and hopefully we'll learn a little something today or at least feel good about it. So what I'd like to do is just get into this here. I'm dealing with two laptops here, so bear with me. I really want to talk about why it's important for us to embrace inclusion. I really do believe that it is our moral obligation for all students to feel included, and that's just not students with disabilities or students without disabilities. It's athletic students, non-athletic students, fit students, non-fit students. I mean, it really, once those students get into our gym and they become yours, and they should all feel included and should all have a sense of belonging. And you know, I was faced with the opportunity to have quite a bit of students with disabilities, and that's why we're here today, but all students should feel equal and included. I've learned from one of my great colleagues that I have the opportunity to present with, and I was his student, Dr. Bob Pangrazi, had taught me a long time ago that not one student is special, they're all special. And you're going to hear that throughout this, because I think that's the fabric to make this work. So rather than this being a how-to approach, I'm just going to share with you my experience with inclusion, especially last year. Last year I was really impacted with many, many students in my class. And I'm going to talk about how it impacted me, how it impacted my students without disabilities, and then also talk about the experience my students with disabilities had. So let's just get into it here. Why this topic? Well, last year, for the first time, I have had students with disabilities, one or two classes each school year, nothing that really impact my everyday PE classes. But last year, a school administrator, our assistant principal, came to me and said, "Oh, Maria, I got a favor to ask." And you know how that goes. It's never good. I said, "What do we got?" And she said, "Well, we lost a contract for one of our sections for an adaptive PE teacher, and we have 15 special needs kids that need a place to go. And can we please put them in your 5th hour?" And, you know, my initial reaction was, oh, my gosh, how the heck am I going to do that? I do not have a background in adaptive PE. So, of course, you know, I said, sure, let's bring it on. Let's take it. These little pumpkins got to go somewhere. They might as well be with me. Let's go. We just want to, you know, get these kids moving anyway, all kids. So it really did start as a mandate for me, but once I wrapped my head around it and once I got to know these kids and how it was all going to work, it really did become a choice for me, and I didn't feel like this was something I had to do. It was something that I wanted to do. And we'll get into this upcoming year, too, and how it changed my program. So that's how I came up with this topic, because it was a wonderful experience. And, you know, first of all, I had to change my mindset about it. You know, these are kids with disabilities, but I had to say, look, if they can move, they're going to have a good experience in my class. So I was looking at it more of what are the possibilities, not focusing on their disabilities. You know, and all these students, I feel, deserve the basic rights or the same opportunities. And, you know, all the students deserve to have a positive PE experience, regardless of their background. So, again, I had to tell myself it doesn't matter how they got here. They're here now, and all of my students are going to be treated equally, but how? How the heck am I going to do this? And that's what we're going to talk about. You know, one point I do want to make, though, is I do take great pride in my profession and in my class, and I didn't want, you know, this to be, or my regular PE classes to feel like a dumping ground, you know, like, well, you know, just give them to PE, or just give these students with maybe behavioral problems, give them to PE, they'll be fine in there. You know, I think we all work very hard and we take a lot of pride in our profession, and I do want to make note of that this was a work in progress to keep that level of excellence and keep my classes running the same, that I wasn't going to make my 5th hour with these 15 special needs class to just be a free-for-all because that's what I was told that I have to do. So it took some work, and let's just get into it. I think the biggest thing, you know, attitude can become a barrier. And we sometimes have preconceived notions of what these students with disabilities cannot do rather than what they can do. And I really do believe all students can learn regardless of their situation. So that's kind of what I had to wrap my head around first. Let me just change the way I think about all this. And I did have some fears. I will tell you, when it came time to start this 5th-hour class with that many students, let me tell you my class sizes, first of all, to give you kind of a visual of what it was going to look like. I already had about 45 students in my 5th hour. So now, keep in mind, we're adding 15 special needs kids in addition to the 45 typical students. So I had a real big fear of lack of structure. I run a pretty tight ship. There's very little downtime. I set high expectations. So I was worried I was going to lose control of my class during that 5th-hour class. I also had a fear of the lack of training on how to teach students with disabilities. Like I said, I do not have an adaptive PE background. I think I took one course in college, and 25 years ago, so I certainly was feeling a little unsure about that. I also had a fear of my students without disabilities, whether or not they were going to enjoy their experience. Was this going to take away from, why they signed up for my class? Are they going to get the benefits out of PE with the distractions or just a different feel with having those students in there? Another one of my fears was the students with disabilities not enjoying their experience. Was my content going to be too difficult for them? Are they even going to be able to perform and get any benefit out of it? A couple more fears I had was having students with disabilities getting injured. I mean, I teach fitness, so we have, heavy equipment in there. We have kettlebells and body bars and medicine balls, and I thought, oh my gosh, am I going to have to take all that away and totally change the way I do things in regards to equipment? A big fear was, God, I don't want anybody to get hurt, any students. And we'll talk about some modifications that I did with that later, but that was definitely a fear of mine, and not to mention their disabilities, as far as seizures and whatnot. My last fear, although I had many, but at least for the purpose of this webinar, is the students with disabilities not being able to do or to understand what was being taught. How are they going to get through the day? So those are just some of my initial fears there. And let's just kind of get into each one of those, not all of them, but at least the top 3 that really were a concern of mine. Class structure. Starting class is important, as you know. I mean, it sets the tone for the rest of the day. I really like to get them moving instantly, get through roll call, get the lesson instruction done, get set up, and get going. I do not like downtime, and I was afraid these simple things, just like taking roll, was going to be difficult. I use uploadable pedometers to chart their activity, their MBPA, their steps, and I was wondering how that was going to work with the students with disabilities. How I'm going to pass them out, are they even going to know how to use them, how are they going to upload, all of those issues. And then keeping the students on task before, during, and after. So let's talk about the first one, starting class. One of the important things I realized is during roll call, I decided to use the same format for all students. I did not want, I think the first day, the classroom aids that came with the 15 students with disabilities, and we'll talk about the role of the classroom aids later, but the first couple days, they were pulling them aside, so I would have my students in a circle in roll call, and I was going through, and the students with disabilities were on the whole other side of the gym, and they were trying to take roll, and I thought, well, that doesn't make much sense, and like I said, I wanted to make all students feel included, so let's bring them on over, and we'll get them in alphabetical order. It took a couple days for them to remember where they go, but with the help of my students without disabilities, it was they helped them, said, you stand here, you're my partner, you're my neighbor, and it all worked out. And I really felt that right out of the gates, right at the beginning of class, that they felt belonged, and it's one class. I didn't have my regular PE class, as I don't like to refer to it, and then my APE students over there. I decided, you know what, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to teach them all the same. And that really helped out a lot. During the lesson instruction, you know, when I was explaining what the lesson was and where they're going to go and what they're going to do, I really had to just hone in over and over and over, freeze, eyes on me, just because those little pumpkins love to move. And, you know, it's hard for them to stop and listen. They're excited. I mean, elementary teachers, if you're out there listening, I'm sure you would be much better at this than I was. I wasn't used to the runners and the wigglers, and you know, my obstacle a lot of times with these high school students is to get them to move, and these little 15 pumpkins were all over the place. So once I honed in on the freeze, eyes on me, and I practiced that every day with them, they got it, and it was just while I gave my quick instruction. I also asked for volunteers from students without disabilities to assist that, and obviously I asked that without the APE students in the gym, and that really did help. There were, you know, most of my students wanted to help out, and they liked that role to help out, and it was, just a huge help to me. So that was one thing, you know, use your students without disabilities to jump in there and help you out, in addition to the student aides. Well, let's talk about using the uploadable pedometers, because this is a big part of my program. This is how I assess. This is how they assess. This is kind of the meat and potatoes behind my fitness class. And I wanted them to use them. I thought, well, I know they're used in elementary school. All the little kindergartners I know use them, and it's such a benefit for them to start teaching them early how to assess themselves and what all this means. So I used this is the actual, I don't know what you call this, the little handout thing that I have for the students. This is how they get their pedometer. Each student has a number, and they go in, and right before roll call, they go in, grab their pedometer out of their designated number, and get into the roll call spot. I tried this at first with my 15 students with special needs, and they had a really hard time memorizing their number. So I decided to go ahead and put their names in there instead, and that helped a ton. It solved that problem. It helped a great deal. They just go in, see their name, grab it. So that's what that looked like there. What I do with the students is the students with disabilities, I only had them focus on steps and activity time, not MVPA. That was just a little bit too advanced for them. And I kind of followed the elementary rule of thumb where, you know, even in elementary you don't get into MVPA until maybe third grade, maybe second. But those earlier years we just stick with the activity time and steps. So that's how the distribution looked. As far as uploading, I started out with 2 carts. This cart that you're looking at right here was my special cart, if you will, that the students with special needs, this is the one they used. If you notice the readers at the top, for those of you who are familiar with using uploadable pedometers, you know that these readers are on top here, the 4 black things on top. Those are connected to the laptop. Well, if you notice here, there is no laptop. So, you know, they didn't notice. My students with disabilities didn't even notice, but those 15 pumpkins would come over here, upload their pedometer into the reader just to get practice. It wasn't uploading to anything. And I did that for about 2 or 3 weeks, and that really helped because they knew as soon as class ended, they hustled over to this cart. They knew how to put their pedometer in the reader. They held it down, and I told them to just count to 3, 1, 2, 3, and then they were done, and they went ahead and put their pedometer back into this where their names are. And then what happened was once I knew they had this solid, then I got rid of this cart, and they went to the cart where all my students were uploading, and it wasn't, you know, bogging down the data or crashing the system because so many of them were pulling it out too soon or whatever. So this really, really helped. It didn't take that long. I would say actually just a couple weeks of practice, and then they got it. So the other area that I talked about that I was concerned about was keeping all students on task. What you see right here, these are my simple 3 rules that I have for all my students, and I expected all my students to follow. Stop, look, and listen. Respect the rights of others. Hustle and say, I can, or I'll give it a try. So these are the rules that are posted in my gym for all my classes, all my students, and it was, you know, the same set of standards for my students with disabilities. I did have a special set of rules for my students with special needs, and I would talk to them all the time, and I'd pull them aside at the beginning, and for a few days I would talk about this. Never leave the gym or area. As I said, you know, they're very excited. There's a lot of stimuli going on in that gym. I have music playing, and I had 45 of my other students, and there's equipment, and everything's shiny and bright and new to them. So sometimes they would get overly excited and leave the gym, and I had, you know, over 55 students that I was in charge of, and so that was one of them that I really had to hammer home here is you stay here. If you need to get a drink or use the restroom, you need to see me, you need to see your instructional aide. This next one, boy, I had to work on every single day with these guys. Keep your hands and feet to yourself. My experience last year was, boy, these students are the most lovable, sweet people you will ever meet, and they love to give high fives, and they love to hug, and they love to show their affection. And as much as I did enjoy that and love that, I really had to keep a cap on that because, you know, my students are trying to work out, and I want everyone to stay on task, and there were probably, you know, high fives going on every 2 seconds, and really the students that I had 15 boys, by the way, and these are teenage boys, whether they have disabilities or not disabilities. They have hormones like everybody else. And boy, they want. And I typically teach girls fitness, although it's a co-ed class, and I have some boys. 90% of my students are female. So you can imagine the obstacle that I was having. There was a lot of hugging. Several of the students with disabilities were thinking that the girls were their girlfriends, and so I had to watch that, and I had to really keep on that second rule there. And it helped. If you practice it, they're going to get it. And the last one was just try your best. Have fun. As long as you're moving around and trying your best, you're going to have success, and you're going to do well. I'll be happy, you'll be happy, and we're going to get through this. So that's a little bit about the rules that I started for them. Keeping all students on task, also active management. You know, with that many students and with that many students with disabilities, boy, you know, I had to be on the floor. I had to be moving around at every station, reinforcing the positive behavior over and over and over. And, you know, as the semester went on, I didn't have to do it as much, but it was an everyday occurrence where I had to say, hey, you know, Rodney, great job stopping when you heard the whistle. Elijah, you know, I love the way that, you know, you put the equipment down gently. I mean, all of that you have to constantly reinforce. And that was new for me. You know, before I had these special needs students, you know, I could get away with, you know, here and there. But, boy, it was an everyday thing. So I had to be ready when that 5th hour came. If I was tired, forget about it because I knew I had to get in there and I was going to move. But it sure did make the hour go by fast, and we all had a whole lot of fun. So those were a couple things I wanted to stress and talk about. I had talked to you a little bit at the beginning of this about working with instructional aids. You know, it's hard. I had to share my classroom all of a sudden, and I, you know, I've been there 22 years. I run the show in that gym. It's me, it's mine, and those are my students, and this is how I run things. And so that was hard for me to share those responsibilities. So early on, we had to establish what the roles are. And at first, the instructional aides were helping me teach and talking, and it was confusing. It was confusing for me. It was confusing for the students. So, you know, just after the second day, I kind of pulled them aside and said, hey, I appreciate you. I appreciate what you do, and I do need your help. Let's recognize that right away. However, I'm going to be the teacher. You're going to help, you're going to assist with these students, make sure that they stay on task. And once we established that, you know, it ran a lot more smooth, and we got some headway there. The communication was key for me and them. I had 3 instructional aides with 15 students with special needs. One of the instructional aides was in charge of 1 student, another instructional aide was in charge of 1 other student, and then the third was in charge of all of them. So I really only had 1 instructional aide who was kind of helping me watch the other, you know, 12 students with needs. I wanted to know more from them, what are their disabilities? You know, sometimes it's hard to tell. It's not the obvious of maybe a Down syndrome or whatever. Please tell me. I want to go through the role. I want to know, what does the student have? What does it look like? What does it mean? Also, what are their, you know, consistent behaviors? And by talking to them and working with them with that, I had a much better understanding for, you know, just their commonalities of what we're looking at. For example, I had a student, Brian. Oh, he loved to take off and run. You know, he would do good for a while, and then he would try to escape. I had another student who his common behavior was he wanted to be in charge all the time and run the class. And I'll talk about Elijah later because he ended up being one of my favorites. But they're all my favorite. They're all special. But oh, I got a kick out of this one. He wanted my job. I think it was after my job. So, again, communication was key here, working with those instructional aides, establishing the roles, and we made it through here. You know, I do believe all students can learn. There's a way to tap into all potential. Let me give you an example here. I was teaching one lesson. We were doing ultimate frog toss, just like ultimate frisbee, ultimate football, but I was using the big rubber frog. And I got the students in teams of 5 on 5, and the instructional aides came right over to me and said, there's no way they're going to understand the rules here. They're not going to be able to do this. And I said, well, maybe. let me give it a shot here. So I took the 15 students, and I think on that day I actually had 10 present, so I had 5 on 5 special needs kids. I kept them separate for this particular lesson because I knew none of them knew the rules, and it can get a little rough, so I took my typical students to the other side of the gym for this day. I went through, taught them the rules, one at a time. Very simple. First, I had them just throwing the frog around. They were having a ball, having a blast. Then I slowly introduced, you know, just pass it to your teammates. They got used to that. Then I took another step forward and said, okay, now try to pass it to your team and try to get it past this line. And then, you know, I just kept going further and further. And by the end of the class, just one class period, these guys were playing ultimate frog toss exactly like my other students. In fact, Elijah, who I said likes to be in charge all the time, he took the role of being coach. He kept saying, time out, I got to pull my team together, we got to get a strategy. I mean, it was the coolest thing I have ever seen. And, you know, there is potential there for them to learn, you know, just about anything. I set high expectations for my students without disabilities, and I realized on that day that, you know, I can set the same high expectations for these students. It might take a little bit longer. I might have to teach it a little bit differently, but but gosh dang it, if they didn't do it, and they had a ball. In fact, every day, oh, Coach, can we play frog toss? So it was really neat. You know, I think this is an opportunity for all kids to have a great experience in PE, like I said before. You know, I think these kids have typically been marginalized. I think people set low expectations and, oh, they can't do that. They won't be able to do that. Give it a shot. See, if they can, great. If they can't, that's okay. Move on to something else. But, you know, the other thing I want to point out is don't portray these people with disabilities as overly brave or overly superhuman, and you coddle them, and you know, this implies that this is unusual for people with disabilities to have talents or to have skills. You know, if someone is disabled, you know, maybe with their locomotor skills, don't assume that they're cognitively disabled, or vice versa. If they're cognitively disabled, don't just assume that they're not going to be able to move or jump or skip or hop. So, you know, these were all things that I had to teach myself and make myself aware of. Some of the personal challenges that I had is, like I said, that I had to come up with solutions for was that overwhelming affection. One quick little story for you. I had one student who he just thought that one particular female student that I had was his girlfriend, and he was constantly texting her and Snapchatting and all the social media stuff. And she came to me and she was concerned and she was uncomfortable. And he always wanted to be by her. I always wanted to hold her hand. I always wanted to hug her. And I talked to him. I talked to instructional aides. I talked to his case manager. Finally, it went to the assistant principal because it was getting very inappropriate and was really making my student uncomfortable. And that student actually, unfortunately, had to get removed. So do know that, you know, it's not going to be perfect. There are going to be some cases where it just doesn't work. Hopefully this coming fall I see Brian come back to my class and see if he's, you know, matured a little bit in that area, but that was one of the challenges I did have. Again, another one of my personal challenges, being unfamiliar with the different disabilities. Yes, I may know that they, you know, have Down syndrome or whatever it may be, but what does that mean? You know, can I get their heart rate up? Can I push them? How hard can I push them? How much should I pull back? And that has been a personal challenge for me to research and get to know what each of these disabilities are, how it works, do they need extra water, all of that rest. And then, you know, giving equal attention to all students. You know, those 15 took a lot of my attention away, and I didn't want to pull away from my students that did not have disabilities. And, you know, they wanted a good workout just as much as these students wanted a good workout. And that was tough at first. But when I just told myself, treat them all the same, teach the lesson the same, get through it, walk around, actively manage with all of them, you know what, that worked itself out, and it ended up being really good. It ended up being not so much of a challenge after all. You know, our goal as PE teachers is we want them to have a positive experience. We want them to move. We want them to like it. We want them to have fun. And we got to get these kids to enjoy physical activity, and it doesn't matter who they are. So I also wanted all students to be accepting of others without prejudice. I think it was a great benefit for my students without disabilities to see these students with disabilities every single day. You know, after a couple days of all being together, crammed in that gym, doing all the same thing, you don't even look at these students differently, that they do have a disability. We're all just the same in there, sweating and laughing and listening to music and playing with equipment. And, you know, that's how we got rid of the prejudice, just embracing it, welcoming them, providing a sense of belonging and all of that. So here are some positive outcomes that came of all this. My students with disabilities were able to upload their pedometer data. I could show their activity time. I could show their steps. I gave their case manager feedback. I gave their parents feedback. I gave them feedback. So they started to understand how important it is to move and to be active, and that exercise should be a part of their lifestyle, and it can be fun. We had the opportunity for all students to be included, better understanding of acceptance of people who aren't like us. I think the fear and prejudice comes from, well, they're not like us. Well, you know what? None of us are like each other, and it's good to kind of be forced to be in the same room and work with each other, and that help break down those fears or those barriers. What I really liked seeing also, a huge positive outcome, is students helping other students. They're all jackrabbits to me. That's our mascot. We're the Mesa High Jackrabbits, and we all wore purple, and we were all students. And my typical students had a great sense of pride and just a good feeling of helping students in need and getting them through the same workout that they were struggling with. And boy, it was just a neat culture and climate in my classroom in that 5th hour. And everybody had an increase in physical activity. You know, to sit back and watch these kids move, I mean, it really was inspirational for me. This is what I got to see every day, what you're looking at on this screen. These aren't my students, but this is what I saw. Lots of hugs and high fives, although I had to keep a handle on it. It was wonderful. A colleague once said to me, you know, they're lucky to have you. And the only thing I could think of is, well, I felt lucky. I mean, I felt just so fortunate and lucky to have these sweethearts in my class, and it changed the way I viewed things. It changed the way I viewed students and people with disabilities, and it changed the way I viewed my other students, and God, it just enhanced the program so much. I got to tell this story. This little pumpkin, she reminds me of one of mine that I had. Every day, these 15 students would come to me and show me their pedometer and say, look, Coach, look what I got. They'd show me their muscles, but every day they would thank me. Elijah is the one I told you about who wanted to be in charge all the time. Oh, he just tickled me. He had to be the coach. He wanted to be me. He got up in front of the class. He would help instruct his other APE students on what to do, and he was in charge, and he really became such a great staple in our class. And boy, I don't think I've ever smiled and laughed so much as in my 5th hour. And I really feel grateful that I had the opportunity to get them. You know, enthusiasm is contagious, and these little pumpkins are smiling and happy every day. I wish all my students were like that. I wish I was like that, but the most affectionate, optimistic, happy people in the world are these students, hands down. So to wrap this up, I want to tell you this is the coolest part of all this is because of the experience and the success of last year, the administration and I got together and we came up with a different course actually called Modified PE. It's in the catalog. It is my 5th hour, and it's a little bit different in the fact that I was able to pre-select and ask students who would like to be, these are students without disabilities, who would like to be in this class that is going to work with students with disabilities. You're still going to be doing fitness. You're still going to do the curriculum. You'll get your workout in, but it's specifically designed for you to work with students with disabilities. Help me help them. And they'll get service learning credit. They'll get their PE credit, but they will get to decide, yes, I would like to do this. And it's not adaptive PE. It's not inclusion. It's a modified PE class. It's more structured. So I think it's going to be a one-on-one format, which means I'll have 15 students with special needs and 15 students who have chosen and volunteered to be in there to work with special needs as well as working out. And then all the participants will participate in different lifelong fitness activities. We'll be walking, we'll be talking about nutrition, we'll be doing all kinds of fun fitness activities. So I'm really excited about that. So this has started out as I was told, you got to take these 15 kids. There's no place for them to go. me freaking out and being panicked, all the way up to now having a wonderful, positive experience, getting through the kinks, working it out, changing my mindset, and now I have this course created just for typical students and students with disability called Modified PE. I'm really excited about maybe next summer I'll do a webinar on how that went. Who knows? So that's pretty much it for me. The final thought here is, you know, let's be, as educators, not just physical education, but as educators, let's be advocates for all students. And I really do believe that they are all special in their own right. So that's it for me. We can open it up to questions and answers now if you want, Tabor.
Yeah.
And
thanks, Maria.
everyone for listening. Yeah.
And just a reminder, if you had some questions that are kind of coming to light as we go through some of the questions that have been posted, feel free to put those on the right-hand side of the screen. In the questions area, we'll get to as many of those with Maria as we can. Maria, one of the questions we had was, how do you select partners for students with disabilities? And I think what the question's getting at is, you know, do you do it the typical way that you would in any of your regular ed classes, or do you partner them up with other students with disabilities, or how do you do that?
For just about all of my activities, I would, you know, have them, I would use my same dynamic PE management. I'd have everybody jog around, skip, whatever. I'd say freeze, toe-to-toe with a partner. And my rule is always find the closest one and don't pick the same person more than one time. So I followed that 99% of the time. Once in a while, if I felt that the activity was maybe just a little bit too challenging, you know, I would have my typical students partner up first, and then I'd have the APE students partner up together, and I'd have the student aides help me with that. But most of the time, my students with disabilities would usually partner up with one of my students without disabilities, and my students without disabilities were such good sports about that. They would always run and grab one of them. I mean, that's how I would do it. It didn't seem to be an issue or a problem ever.
Good.
So
yeah,
yeah.
A few questions, kind of about how you manage the aides, and it sounds like that's a challenge that some of the attendees are having here. Is, you know, having to manage a lot of adults within a class in addition to your students. So, did your aides participate in the classes?
My experience with, like I said, I had 3. 2 of them did absolutely nothing. They sat on the side and played on their cell phones. I'm just going to be blunt about it. Yep. The other one that I had that was in charge of all of them, you know, he started out that way, and I had a heart-to-heart with him. I said, look, you know, this is either going to work or it's not going to work. And if for this to work, you and I have got to work together, and I can't take 50 kids, 15 of them with special needs, and do this on my own. So here's what I'd like you to do. And I would really appreciate it. And we ended up having a really nice working relationship, and he ended up being a great asset and a great help. But early on, we had to establish our roles. What's your job going to be? What's my job going to be? And, you know, I thanked him a ton, and I pumped him up. And those teachers are right that, you know, sometimes, yes, I felt like I was teaching the teachers. But once I established that, they ended up being a good help. Okay. But I understand the flavor of that question, believe me.
Yeah, and you kind of answered the next one. Do you assign the aides a duty? And you'd mentioned that you did kind of do that with the one of the 3. Looking back on it, you know, and advice to maybe some teachers that are just kind of dealing with this, would you have assigned all 3 of them, you know, a duty, or is it one of those things where you can't really make them do something they don't want to do?
Well, my situation, though, I had 3. One of them, the school or the case manager, I'm not sure how that worked, his job was only assigned to 1 student, so I couldn't touch that. That was their mandate or their directive from their boss. And then the other one was the same thing. I guess it was just a student with severe special needs that student had to have 1 aide on them all the time. One of them I know was because he took off all the time. So his parents and the case manager and an administrator had decided that this aide is going to be just on him. And so I really only had 1, and that was the one that I said, look, this is going to be, you're going to make sure that these students stay in the gym, and you're going to make sure that they stay on task, and you're also make sure that they are okay with the equipment, that they don't hurt themselves. And I was watching all of that as well. We were doing that together. The other two were just assigned to the two individuals. So there wasn't a whole lot I could do with them.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
I think, let's see, question here that is about, did you find that through your work with students with disabilities that some of the skills that you developed and used were transferred into some of the other courses and classes that you were teaching? Were there, any particular things that stand out where, you're maybe, pushed into an area that you wouldn't have otherwise been pushed into that kind of allowed you to learn some things that you could use with some of your other classes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's really kind of a cool thing that happened with me is, I do modifications in my other classes. I have different students with different fitness needs. Some can do 1 push-up, some could do 10 push-ups. And after working with these students with disabilities and constantly having to modify all my activities on such a great range, I was able to take those skills into my other classes. So absolutely, I think my teaching became better because of it, because I was really then honed in on focusing on meeting the needs of all, as opposed to just assuming they can all do it. And here's the workout, everyone do it the same. Well, no, not everybody's the same, and, some are going to have to, instead of using a medicine ball, we might use a playground ball. Instead of, doing the kettlebell this way, we're going to do the kettlebell this way, or lighter or heavier. So it did transfer into my other classes. It made me a much better teacher.
Sure. Good.
Yep.
Can you speak a little bit to the level of inclusion that your school kind of adopts with students with disabilities? And I know sometimes it seems like students with disabilities, the inclusion is a lot easier in the elementary and middle school, and sometimes it gets a bit more difficult up into the high school where you teach. Are there other opportunities for inclusion within other academic areas within the class day that your school adopts with students with disabilities?
I'm not too familiar outside of PE as far as what what inclusion looks like academically. I will tell you, though, and I don't know if I spent much time on this, we do have adaptive PE. We have adaptive PE for the students with severe disabilities, wheelchairs and whatnot. And then we have inclusion, and now we're going to have this modified PE. But, we've been having inclusion for, several years, where it was just a couple students in a couple of our classes, and now it's becoming more and more and more. Every year I notice more students being put into the general ed classes. In fact, obviously I had 15 in one now, but I think that was due to losing a course section or a stipend. But as far as our school and inclusion, I think we're like everybody else as far as academically. I don't feel comfortable knowing that. I don't know, only PE. But we do have adaptive PE still in place.
Okay. I had a couple questions that I was kind of saving for the end to make sure that we got through all of the questions on adapted PE and inclusion in PE. I know you've done a lot of work with the pedometers and uploading the pedometers and the data and things like that, and you've done an entire webinar series on how you use those. But one question was about the upload, and for some of the folks in our audience who might not be familiar with the type of pedometers you're using, can you speak a little bit about how you're uploading the info, and do the students do this, or do the aides do it, or just you? Maybe speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, good question. The students do it. Those 15 special needs students, where they got their pedometer, they put it on. I didn't have to worry about them setting their MVPA goal, so that was easy. They wore them all day. They checked it out. They loved seeing that number change. I didn't care how many times they looked at it. They'd always show it to me, and we'd give high fives, and then they would walk over, when all my other students would walk over to the cart with the laptop and the readers, and they knew how to put it in themselves, hold it down. The data would upload in about 3 seconds, and they knew that as soon as that pedometer showed 0, then they were done. They closed it and put it away where their name was. I was surprised as the next person that they could do all this, but they could. And like I said, they practiced it without it being attached to the laptop at first, just so I saw that they can get it in the reader, hold it down, and put it away. And once a couple weeks of that, they uploaded just like any of my other students. And they did it all on their own. The aides did not help with that. I did not help with that. They got it.
Great. Great. Well, thanks so much, Maria. Before we get to the winner of our giveaway, our InReach set of 6 coated foam balls, I wanted to remind everybody that you will receive an email with your certificate of participation, and also you'll receive at some point here in the next week or two the announcement for next month's webinar. Usually they take place the 3rd week of every month, and we'll have the topic out here shortly. The winner of our coated foam InReach ball set is Michelle Vendito, a PE teacher at Glen Falls High School in New York. So Michelle will get those out to you right away. Again, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you so much, Maria, and we hope that all of you can join us next month for our webinar series the 3rd week of the month. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.